Hi, I'm Julia Cronin, the Curator of Collections and Exhibits here at Turtle Bay Exploration Park, and I want to welcome you to Reading in the Roaring '20s. This in-house curated exhibition looks back 100 years at what our community was like in the 1920s, which is considered to be the first modern decade. The exhibition is both a celebration of Reading in the 1920s and a bit of an expose about what life was really like here. Reading is just a reflection of the new progress that was happening during the 1920s, including political changes, incredible demographic changes, and changes in technology. For example, this 1916 Model T sitting behind me would have been very common on the roads of Reading, but it is actually part of a huge wave of change across the nation that changed how people live, where they live, what they do for a living, how they have fun, you name it. It was a huge deal, and it was a huge deal here in Reading because we were on the highway.
Just like today, in the 1920s, Reading was a hub of transportation, commerce, hospitality, and tourism. Folks could ride a stage, drive their own car, or travel by train. There were service stations and auto camps to help travelers as they were passing through touring the great outdoors, which became a popular pastime in the 1920s after the advent of the automobile. You can't talk about the 20s without talking about Prohibition. Even Reading couldn't escape the 18th Amendment. 40 saloons had to close their doors. However, not before celebrating the Days of 49, which included all kinds of gambling and Wild West customs, according to the Escondido Times-Advocate.
So if you take a look at our hardworking woman's desk here, she's got this giant adding machine. She's got pens, an antique typewriter to look at, and things like that. And you realize that today, a lot of the things that people used in the 1920s have been condensed down into very few objects. You might just have a laptop. Heck, you might be doing everything on your phone. It's a link with that past. We still sit at desks, we still process information, and we still have customer service as part of our daily lives. But another thing we wanted to explore was who was working. And this is the decade when, of course, rural women have always had to work outside the home to keep things together. But this is a decade when my friend here was able to, as a middle-class woman, choose to work outside the home because she had things like appliances at home that made her life easier. So she went into work into an office and was able to accomplish quite a lot. If you look at Reading's history, we have a lot of women in some pretty important roles in the 1920s. And now when you look at business, you see that across the board, which is fantastic.
There were many changes in the 1920s. Stoves became gas-powered, indoor plumbing and electricity became more readily available, and new toys and games hit the Sears catalog. A lot of people embraced these changes. However, just because these new and modern items came along, kids were still playing with toys from centuries before. Some households still had chamber pots in their bedrooms and wood stoves in their kitchens.
One of the things we did with this exhibition was mine our historic photography collection for gems like this shot by Chester Mullen in 1925. Now, this tells a huge story. First of all, this house isn't here anymore in Reading. We have a habit of ripping down our historic homes. This is the extended McDonald, McConnell. There's a lot of people in this photo that are all related to each other in one way or another. But it also tells a story about what 1925 was like. You see these two younger women here, very fashionably dressed for 1925, wearing their beautiful 1925 era, gorgeous 1920s shoes, but you see that the older women are a little more matronly and they're still choosing to wear things like their lace-up boots. Just like today, you're going to see people dressed differently from one another. Not everybody became a flapper just because it was the 1920s. Two of Reading's most iconic buildings were constructed in the 1920s. That's what's the Shasta Learning Center today, which was the Shasta County High School at the time, and the old Pine Street School. And they replaced buildings behind me. Reading's population was growing, but another thing was happening in the 1920s. Children were staying in school, and they were going on to high school, and they were going on to college from Reading. We have a lot of people who went off to places like Stanford and Cal especially in the 1920s, but this history of our schools is fascinating. The first high school didn't even exist here until 1899, and it was the county school. Everybody came in from all over, and they didn't get a building until 1903. So those two 1920s schools that survive, one of which is still a school and the other is not, are really part of this era of expansion and modernization. You can read articles in here about how bad the school buildings were in the 1920s that were falling apart, that those schools replaced, and kind of compare it to what's going on today in our own schools. We're really fortunate to have a collection of historic yearbooks from Shasta High School, including the Shasta Daisy, and we were able to download the entirety of that yearbook without having to scan it and ruin it ourselves. And you get to flip through the 1928 Shasta Daisy, which was a big deal because it was the first year that those students were in the new high school, which had been built in 1927.
One of the hallmarks of the 1920s was the rise of mass media in the form of radio and cinema, which influenced the notion of celebrity and fashion. In 1912, Charles Harrod was one of the first to broadcast a radio signal from San Jose, California. It was only available within a 100-mile radius, so it was unlikely to be heard in Reading. However, by 1925, Reading resident Jack Haviland was able to pick up 70 radio stations with this brand new Grebe radio. These came all the way from Alberta, Canada in the north, San Diego in the south, and New York in the east. Cinema flourished in the 1920s, and Reading had two theaters, the Reading Theater and the Market Street Theater. These theaters housed live entertainment such as vaudeville acts and also silent films. The first talkie was released in America in 1927. This technology became available at the Reading Theater by 1929. For the first time, Reading residents could see and hear a film. Cinema had a huge impact on fashion. It was through cinema and film that the flapper became popular and mainstream. A flapper was a young, modern, rebellious woman who exhibited scandalous behavior, such as wearing makeup, driving an automobile, listening to jazz, smoking, and drinking in mixed company. An iconic flapper has a short bobbed hairstyle and ankle-revealing dress that flaps when she dances the Charleston.